At 2:17 a.m., Ring sent me a motion alert. My fiancée was in the hallway kissing a man and whispering, "He won't be back tonight." I pulled into the driveway 8 minutes later, when she opened the door and saw me. At 2:17 a.m., my phone vibrated against the metal tray beside the operating room sink. I had just finished scrubbing out, my hands still smelling faintly of antiseptic, my back tight from leaning over a patient for hours. Night shift always distorted time, but that vibration cut straight through the fog in my head. I glanced down expecting a generic motion alert, the kind that triggered when the air kicked on or a shadow passed the hallway sensor. Instead, the screen loaded video. The angle was unmistakable. Our hallway. The narrow strip of carpet between the coat closet and the bedroom door. Brooke stood barefoot, her back pressed against the wall where we had hung framed photos from our last vacation. A man leaned into her, one hand on her waist, his face buried against her neck. She tilted her head, kissed him, and whispered something I could not hear clearly until the camera picked up her voice. "He won't be back tonight." The words felt rehearsed, casual, like a line said many times before. I did not replay the clip. I did not freeze. I locked my phone, peeled off my gloves, and told the charge nurse I was leaving early. She asked if I was okay. I told her I had a family emergency. That was not a lie. The drive home took 8 minutes. I knew because I checked the clock at every red light. My hands shook on the steering wheel, but my thoughts stayed sharp, clinical, the same way they did when something went wrong on the table and panic had no place. The apartment lights were on when I pulled into the driveway. That detail mattered more than it should have. I parked crooked and did not bother correcting it. The front door opened before I knocked. Brooke's face drained of color so quickly it looked unreal, like blood had been siphoned out of her all at once. Her mouth opened, then closed, and she took half a step back as if she had forgotten how doors worked. I walked past her without saying a word. The apartment smelled wrong. Not unfamiliar, just altered. A different cologne layered over ours, faint but present. My chest tightened, not emotionally, but physically, the way it did before a long case when I knew something was about to go sideways. "Tyler," she said, my name stretched thin. "You weren't supposed to." I did not respond. I moved toward the bedroom. She stepped in front of me. Hands raised like this was a misunderstanding that could be negotiated if she found the right tone. Her breathing was shallow. She looked smaller than she had an hour ago, like the image on the camera had been braver than the person standing in front of me. "He's gone," she said quickly. "You scared him." He ran out the back. I looked past her and saw the bedroom door half closed. That was when Derek stepped into view. He stood barefoot on our rug, jeans pulled on hastily, shirt missing. His hair was longer than I remembered, his face a little heavier, but recognition hit instantly. The recognition came from old photos, from stories Brooke had told late at night about college heartbreaks that were supposedly long buried. Derek, her ex-boyfriend, the one she said moved to Seattle after graduation, the one she swore had nothing to do with her life anymore. He did not meet my eyes. Brooke started talking too fast, words tripping over each other, explanations arriving before I asked for any. She said this was not what it looked like, then contradicted herself by admitting it was exactly what it looked like, then tried to pivot again. I told her to stop. Silence filled the apartment in a way that felt louder than shouting. Derek shifted his weight like he was deciding whether to bolt. I noticed small details because my brain refused to shut off. The scuff on his shoe, the indentation on the mattress behind him, the fact that his phone was charging on my side of the bed. I asked him how long he had been back in town. He said nothing. Brooke answered instead. For months. That was the number she settled on after several false starts. For months of meetings, of lies layered on top of routines so ordinary I had never questioned them. Business trips, late yoga classes, nights when she said she was too tired to talk. I asked where they met. Hotels. Always hotels. Never here until tonight, she said, as if that distinction mattered. As if bringing him into our home was the line she had only just crossed. I asked how she paid for them. Her eyes flicked toward the kitchen, toward the drawer where we kept paperwork. That movement told me more than her words ever could. I opened my phone. The joint savings account loaded slowly, as if it wanted to give me time to prepare. The balance was wrong, not slightly off, not confusing in a way that could be explained by bills or timing. $23,000 was gone. I did the math without thinking. That money was supposed to be for the wedding, for emergencies, for the future she had talked about constantly while steering us in a different direction entirely. Brooke started crying then, real crying, loud and messy. She slid down the wall and pressed her face into her hands. Derek moved toward her instinctively and then stopped when I looked at him. That moment told me everything I needed to know about who she turned to when things collapsed. She admitted it after that, not all at once, but in pieces that fell out when there was nothing left to hold them in. She said she never stopped loving him. She said she stayed with me because I was safe, because I had stability, because my income meant she never had to worry about money. She said she thought she could keep both lives separate long enough to decide what she really wanted. The words did not feel personal. They felt transactional. I told them to leave. Derek hesitated, then went back into the bedroom to gather his things. Brooke looked up at me like she was waiting for permission. I repeated myself, and she stood, unsteady, wiping her face as if that could erase what had already happened. They left together. The door clicked shut behind them, and the apartment went still. I stood there for a long time after they were gone. Not frozen, just processing. I walked through each room like I was inventorying damage after a disaster. Drawers half open, sheets tangled. A hotel receipt folded into a pocket of her jacket hanging by the door. The name on the receipt was Derek's. The date was last week. That was when I understood this was not just infidelity. This was logistics. Planning. A parallel life financed quietly through trust one had never thought to protect. I sat down on the couch as dawn began to creep through the blinds and realized that whatever this was, it was already bigger than the moment I had caught on camera. The apartment felt wrong the moment the door closed behind them. Not quiet in a peaceful way, but hollow, like sound had nowhere to land. I stood in the hallway where the camera had caught them and tried to picture the scene without myself in it, the way it must have played out dozens of times before the alert finally reached me. The thought did not spiral. It hardened. I picked up the jacket Brooke had left draped over the chair. The receipt I had noticed earlier slid from the pocket and fluttered onto the floor. I did not rush. I bent down, smoothed it out, and read it like I would a chart before a case. Hotel name, room number, dates. Derek's name printed cleanly, as if the truth needed no disguise. I placed the receipt on the kitchen counter and began moving through the apartment with intention. This was not a search born of rage. It was the instinct that takes over when something is wrong, and the only way forward is to understand the extent of it. Drawers first. Desk. Filing cabinet. The shoebox where we kept old warranties and passports. I found more receipts folded small, tucked between papers, hidden where a casual glance would never land. Hotels. Always within driving distance. Always on nights when I had worked late or picked up extra shifts. The pattern was not subtle once it revealed itself. My phone buzzed. A text from Brooke asking to talk. I did not answer. I opened the banking app again, hoping there was some explanation I had missed. A transfer pending. A mistake reversed. Instead, there were withdrawals spaced out carefully, amounts small enough not to trigger an alert on their own, adding up to that same missing number. $23,000. It was gone in pieces, not all at once. That meant time. Planning. Confidence that I would not notice. I sat at the table and let that settle. When I stood again, it was with a different purpose. I packed a bag for myself first, then stopped and realized there was no need. This was my apartment. My grandmother's apartment. The realization landed with a weight that steadied me. I set the bag down and kept going through Brooke's things instead. The pregnancy test was in the back of her drawer, hidden under scarves she never wore. The plastic was cold in my hand. 2 lines. Dated 5 weeks ago, scribbled in faint marker on the wrapper like a note meant only for her. She had never said a word. I called her. She answered on the second ring, breathless, like she had been waiting. I asked one question. I asked if the baby was mine. The silence on the line stretched too long to mean anything else. When she spoke, her voice sounded far away. She said she did not know. She said the timing overlapped. She said she had slept with Derek the same week. I hung up without responding. The room felt smaller after that, like the walls had edged closer while I was not looking. I sat on the bed, stared at the indentation where Derek had stood earlier, and waited for something like shock to arrive. It never did. What came instead was a tight focus that made every detail sharp. The knock on the door startled me more than it should have. I checked the camera feed out of habit and saw Warren standing in the hallway, jacket thrown over scrubs, eyes already worried. I let him in without explanation. He took one look at my face and did not ask questions. He followed me into the living room and sat while I told him everything, starting with the alert and ending with the test. I expected interruption, disbelief, something. He listened like someone who understood that timing mattered and reactions could wait. We went back to searching together. Warren was thorough in a way that complemented mine. He checked drawers I would have skipped, looked behind folders, opened envelopes I had assumed were junk. That was when he found the credit card statements. 8 of them. Different banks. Different limits. All addressed to Brooke, but tied to my name. Authorization forms. Online confirmations. Charges stacked month after month. $67,000 in debt spread across accounts I had never seen. The numbers blurred together until Warren read the total out loud, grounding it in something real. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes. The room swayed, just slightly, the way it did when I stood too fast after a long surgery. We kept going. The paperwork was hidden deeper, in a folder tucked behind old tax returns, refinance documents, appraisal forms, a new mortgage statement with numbers that made no sense at first glance. Warren frowned, then read again, slower this time. The apartment had been refinanced. Cash out. $180,000 more than the original balance. My signature was there at the bottom, neat and convincing. It was not my handwriting. I felt something give way then, not dramatically, but enough to register. This was no longer about betrayal in a relationship. This was fraud layered so carefully over trust that it had gone undetected for months. My phone rang. It was my mother. Helen's voice came through clear and cheerful at first, then shifted when she heard mine. She asked if everything was okay. I told her no. There was a pause. Then she said Brooke had called her months ago, crying, asking for help. Brooke had told her I had a gambling problem. She had said I was too ashamed to ask for help myself. She needed $15,000 to cover losses before things spiraled. My mother had sent the money. I thanked her and ended the call before she could ask more questions. Warren looked at me like he wanted to break something on my behalf. I told him to wait. There was more. I called Brooke again. She answered immediately this time. I did not raise my voice. I told her what I had found. The test. The cards. The refinance. I told her my mother had called. I told her I needed to hear the truth once, cleanly, without excuses. She cried. She denied. She blamed stress. She blamed fear. She blamed love. Then, when those explanations failed, she admitted to pieces of it, carefully chosen, still trying to manage what I knew and what I did not. I told her to stop talking. The call ended with her asking where she was supposed to go. I told her that was no longer my concern. After Warren left, I sat alone in the apartment as daylight fully arrived. The sun touched the framed photos on the wall, the ones from trips she had planned while lying about where she was going next. I took them down one by one and stacked them face down on the floor. By noon, my phone was full of messages from numbers I did not recognize. Banks, credit agencies, automated alerts triggered by logins and inquiries I had never made. The system was already responding to damage I was only beginning to understand. I did not eat. I did not sleep. I made lists instead. Accounts, names, dates. Everything I could verify went on paper. Everything uncertain went on another page. When I finally stopped, the lists covered the table like a map of a place I had lived in without ever seeing clearly. The apartment no longer felt like a home. It felt like evidence. And somewhere beneath the exhaustion and disbelief, a realization settled in that was worse than anything else. Brooke had not panicked when I caught her. She had not begged out of fear of losing me. She had panicked because I had arrived 8 minutes earlier than she planned. That meant there were things already in motion that she had expected to finish before I knew anything at all. I drove to my mother's house at dawn because staying in the apartment felt like waiting for something else to detonate. The roads were empty in that early, colorless hour when night shift people and morning people briefly overlap. I parked in front of the house I grew up in and sat for a moment with the engine running, hands resting on the wheel, forcing my breathing to slow. The quiet there was different. It did not belong to Brooke. It belonged to years before she ever entered my life. Helen opened the door in a robe, her hair still pinned from sleep. She looked relieved to see me, then confused when she took in my expression. She stepped aside without asking questions. Coffee was already brewing. The routine of it felt surreal. I told her everything. Not selectively. Not gently. I laid it out in order, the same way I would brief a surgical team before a difficult case. The camera alert. Derek. The money. The documents. The lies told in her name. My mother listened with her hands wrapped tightly around a mug that went untouched. When I finished, she stared at the counter like it might rearrange itself into something less damaging if she waited long enough. She told me Brooke had been convincing. She had cried. She had described scenarios in detail, talked about losses and consequences, framed herself as someone trying to protect me from my own worst impulses. Helen said she felt proud that Brooke trusted her enough to ask for help. She said that was what made it hurt the most. My sister Vanessa arrived before I could leave. She had driven over after seeing missed calls from our mother. She took one look at my face and sat down heavily, bracing herself. When I told her, her reaction was different. She did not look surprised. She looked angry in a focused way that made her words precise. Brooke had called her too. Vanessa said Brooke claimed I was in legal trouble related to malpractice. She said she needed money quickly to cover attorney fees and keep my name out of court filings. Vanessa had sent what she could. She said Brooke promised to pay it back once things stabilized. Between my mother, my sister, and 2 cousins who had also been contacted, the total was just over $40,000. None of them had told me. Each had been convinced they were protecting me from embarrassment or stress. Brooke had used my career, my reputation, my family's instinct to close ranks, and turned them into tools. I left my mother's house with a knot in my chest that did not loosen once I reached the car. I drove straight to the lawyer's office Warren had recommended. The waiting room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper. I filled out intake forms with shaking hands, forcing myself to write neatly. The lawyer listened. He asked questions that cut cleanly through the emotional noise. Dates, account numbers, signatures. When I showed him the refinance documents, his expression changed in a way I had learned to recognize during emergencies. He said very little, but his posture shifted. He explained the immediate risks without softening them. He told me to expect calls from collections. He told me to lock my credit immediately. He told me we would request handwriting analysis and forensic accounting. He said the forged signatures would matter, but that time would be a factor. Then he dropped another weight onto the pile. Brooke had listed me as a co-signer on a business loan tied to Derek. I stared at him, certain I had misheard. The loan was in default. $95,000. Collections agencies had already begun tracing my information because my name appeared on the paperwork. The lawyer slid copies across the desk. The signature was mine again, clean and false. The handwriting was consistent across documents. I left the office with a folder that felt heavier than its contents should have allowed. The air outside was warmer now, the day moving forward with complete indifference. My phone rang while I stood in the parking lot trying to orient myself. The number was unfamiliar. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Gabrielle. Her voice was steady, controlled. She said she was Derek's wife. She said she had 2 children. She said she had found my number after piecing together messages, receipts, and lies that finally stopped adding up. Derek was not Brooke's ex-boyfriend. He was a married man she had been seeing for 3 years. The information landed with a dull thud rather than a shock. It filled gaps rather than creating new ones. Gabrielle said she was filing for divorce. She said she wanted to meet. She said there were things I deserved to see. We met at a coffee shop that afternoon. Public, neutral, quiet enough to talk without being overheard. Gabrielle arrived early and chose a table near the window. She looked tired in a way that suggested months of carrying weight alone. She did not waste time. She showed me messages, travel plans, photos I had never taken, conversations where Brooke and Derek talked about money openly, casually, like it was something to be gathered and divided rather than earned. They discussed timing, exits, contingencies. They spoke about me as a resource that needed careful handling until it was fully extracted. They planned to leave together. Costa Rica. Plane tickets purchased for next month. A house rented under Derek's name near the coast. They talked about starting over somewhere warm and cheap, somewhere records would not follow easily. Brooke discussed how much she could realistically pull before questions were asked. Derek assured her he had experience managing fallout. The pregnancy test appeared in the messages too. It was framed as leverage. Gabrielle said Derek knew about it. He knew it was fake. It was meant to anchor me emotionally if I discovered the affair before the move. Something to delay me. Something to keep me questioning long enough for them to disappear. I sat there, listening, absorbing, feeling the last pieces of uncertainty lock into place. This was not impulsive. This was not emotional confusion. This was a plan refined over years. Gabrielle told me Derek had his own history with fraud, failed ventures, shady loans, support groups he attended to satisfy court requirements. She said Brooke met him through one of those groups after presenting herself as someone recovering from financial abuse. They had bonded over shared strategies. We left the coffee shop separately. There was nothing left to say that would improve either of our situations. By evening, I had filed preliminary reports with my lawyer's guidance. Fraud, forgery, identity theft. Each word felt abstract until it was typed into official forms. I emailed copies of everything to secure folders and backed them up in multiple places. The process steadied me. It gave shape to chaos. That night, I returned to the apartment one last time. I packed only what I needed. Clothing, documents, a few items that had belonged to my grandmother and could not be replaced. I did not look at the bed. I did not touch the walls. As I locked the door, a final realization settled in with uncomfortable clarity. Brooke had not just lied to me. She had mapped my life, identified its pressure points, and dismantled it systematically while smiling across dinner tables and planning a wedding she never intended to attend. Whatever came next would not be contained to private apologies or personal reckoning. This was already in motion, and it would not stop until consequences caught up to everyone involved. The police station smelled like old paper and disinfectant, a familiar combination that usually meant order and procedure. That morning it felt like an admission that whatever illusion of control I had left was gone. I filed reports carefully, line by line, sticking to facts. Fraud, forgery, identity theft. Each category expanded as the detective listened and asked me to slow down, to clarify dates, to separate what I knew from what I suspected. When I finished, he exchanged a look with his partner that told me this was not their first encounter with a situation like mine, but it was not common either. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Brooke was located within days at a roadside motel outside the city, Derek with her. When the officers told me, I felt nothing like relief. There was no satisfaction in knowing where she was. There was only a strange detachment, like learning about a storm that had already passed through and left destruction behind. They arrested both of them without resistance. Brooke cried, according to the report. Derek did not. What surprised the detectives came next. During background checks, Brooke's name began to fracture. Records did not align. Addresses overlapped with other identities. Eventually, the truth surfaced. Brooke was not her real name. She was Bethany Frost. 7 years earlier, under that name, she had been convicted of identity theft in another state and served 18 months in prison. After her release, she had legally changed her name and moved, resetting herself carefully, deliberately. Derek knew. They had met through a financial crimes support group he was required to attend after his own fraud conviction. The relationship they framed as rekindled romance had always been a partnership built on experience. They knew the systems they were exploiting because they had failed inside them before. The pregnancy test was addressed early in the investigation. It was fake, purchased online, the kind marketed as novelty items, but indistinguishable at a glance. The detective explained this gently, as if I needed reassurance. I did not. I had already understood its purpose. It was never about a child. It was about control. As the case unfolded, the banks froze accounts and flagged transactions. The refinance on my grandmother's apartment was reversed after handwriting analysis confirmed the forgery. The loan never became legally binding. The apartment was safe. Knowing that should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like one corner of a burning house that had not caught yet. The credit cards were different. Brooke had authorization. She had access. The charges were technically valid. $67,000 settled into my name like a sentence I had not earned. The forensic accountant explained it without cruelty. The law did not account for betrayal. It accounted for signatures and permissions. The hospital called me in during the 3rd week. Security had found something during their own internal review. Prescription pads had gone missing. My name appeared on scripts tied to illegal distribution. The realization hit like a physical blow. I remembered my work bag, the pocket I never checked, the casual trust that came with long hours and exhaustion. Brooke had taken them. Derek had sold them. I was suspended pending investigation. Those months blurred together in a way I still struggle to describe. Days filled with meetings, phone calls, documentation requests. Nights where sleep came in fragments, interrupted by panic that sat heavy on my chest and made breathing feel optional. I started medication not because I wanted to, but because functioning became impossible without it. The hospital investigation lasted 9 months. Surveillance footage eventually confirmed Brooke entering restricted areas with my badge while I slept after shifts. The stolen pads were traced back to Derek's contacts. I was cleared. My license remained intact. But clearance did not erase rumor. It did not restore confidence. Colleagues spoke more carefully around me. Supervisors watched longer than necessary. The damage settled quietly into my professional life. Brooke's sentencing came a year later. 6 years in federal prison for fraud and identity theft. The judge referenced her prior conviction and the calculated nature of her actions. Derek received 4 years for conspiracy and prescription fraud. I attended neither sentencing. I read the summaries afterward and felt nothing like closure. Gabrielle divorced Derek and moved across the country with her children. We spoke once more, briefly, to exchange documents required by prosecutors. She thanked me for cooperating. I wished her well. That was the extent of our connection. 2 strangers intersecting briefly because of the same destructive force. The financial aftermath stretched on long after the legal one concluded. I worked double shifts. Overtime became routine. Days off disappeared into debt payments. For years passed before the credit cards were paid down fully. For years of watching balances shrink while interest tried to undo progress. I checked my credit report weekly. Fraud alerts lived permanently on every account. I trusted nothing that did not require multiple confirmations. My family relationships suffered in quieter ways. My mother stopped speaking to me for 8 months. She said she felt foolish. She said she should have known. What she meant, eventually, was that she felt complicit and did not know how to face it. When we spoke again, it was cautiously, like learning a new language together. Vanessa tried to bridge gaps, tried to normalize conversations, but tension lingered. Brooke had used all of us, and that left marks no apology could erase. I kept my grandmother's apartment, but I did not live in it. The walls felt contaminated by memory. I rented it out and moved somewhere smaller, somewhere neutral. I avoided routines. I avoided attachment. I avoided anything that required trust. For 3 years, I did not date. When I finally did, it was through Vanessa, someone she knew from work. I disclosed nothing personal at first. I paid for everything separately. I kept finances isolated, information limited. It took 2 years before I shared even partial access to my life. The caution frustrated her at times. She stayed anyway. Therapy became a long-term commitment rather than a short-term fix. 5 years of unpacking how thoroughly my reality had been constructed by someone else. 5 years of learning that vigilance and fear were not the same as awareness. The emotional toll outlasted the financial one by a wide margin. I still work nights sometimes. I still get alerts on my phone. When they buzz unexpectedly, my chest tightens before reason intervenes. That reaction may never fully disappear. The story people imagine ends with arrests, sentences, restored property. The real ending looks quieter. It looks like rebuilding slowly, deliberately, with an understanding that trust is no longer automatic. The camera alert at 2:17 a.m. did not save my relationship. It saved what was left of my life before it was dismantled completely. Everything after that was not recovery. It was reconstruction.